Hello, my friend. Today is Thursday, December 5th, 2024. So I had mentioned yesterday that today perhaps we could discuss a bit more about, hey, Canadian politics, US politics, specifically how that could affect bid farms. Right. And, what the situation in Canada with a potential forthcoming spring election, what a change in leadership might mean for the Bitcoin industry in Canada. Perhaps more pressingly, how an incoming U.S. administration led by President Donald Trump, how is that going to affect bilateral relations between the United States and Canada, specific to Bitcoin mining? I didn't have the opportunity that I would have liked to have had to really, I think, organize my thoughts in a somewhat more coherent manner regarding that. So we're not going to really dig into that as much as I thought we would. I will share, I found on my bookshelf at least an uncorrected page-proof copy of Professor Michael Ignatieff's Fire and Ashes, Success and Failure in Politics. A very good book, I might add, and one that I think the current Prime Minister of Canada may find quite interesting, depending on the outcome of the forthcoming election in Canada, right? So I've been something of a sports-like fan of Canadian politics. I am not a serious student of the subject in the sense that I can't necessarily speak profoundly at length about the topic, but I do find that the question period, right, in Parliament, I find that to be very dynamic, very lively. I've found that to be true for many, many, many years. And I think that if something similar existed in the United States, it would likely lead to the discovery, right, of a leader perhaps who maybe can't even answer a question or think straight, right? I think that format where it's very dynamic, where it's very, there's not a whole lot of opportunity to read from notes. It's more like, look, you got to kind of respond in real time to things being sort of like lobbed in your direction. I think there's something really profoundly good to be said about that. Now, for my American friends, one thing I will point out is that unlike the United States, right, which generally speaking, it seems like over the past number of years, it feels as if though Washington, right, the federal government has become, profoundly powerful, right, to the point where states' rights seem insignificant, right? And maybe the pendulum's changing. I would argue, and my Canadian friends, you can let me know if you agree with this, or maybe I'm a little bit off in describing it this way, but my experience, generally speaking, is that the provinces in Canada tend to wield a significant amount of autonomy, right, and power over their own affairs. Ottawa, arguably, while quite strong, it's not quite the same dynamic as what we have here in the States. And so, when it comes to the topic, the very specific topic of Bitcoin mining, these are the sorts of things I want to dig into in more granularity and more detail. So I want to do my homework, and I want to make sure that I've got my thoughts organized, as I said at the outset, just before really digging into this. But as I alluded to yesterday, I really, really do appreciate and like Canadian politics. Hey, look, it's a topic that interests me. And, I think that I wish more of my American friends would be a bit more, a little bit more, have a better understanding, let's phrase it that way, of what's going on in Canada. I mean, it's, right, hey, it's our neighbor to the north. No, it's not going to become the 51st state. I sort of cringed when I heard that myself. I think Canada is best served being Canada, all right, the true north, strong and free, not part of the United States, right? So anyway, with that said, let's turn our attention to the action in the market today. So, Bitcoin, of course, surpassed $100,000 per coin, and then it, of course, retreated from that. And I'll tell you, I am not inherently surprised in some ways that we've seen a bit of a pullback. I do think that to some extent, that type of pullback is gonna kind of be what we see for a while here, absent there being a really significant, a really, really significant catalytic type news event that changes the equation dramatically, and then we see Bitcoin really go to the races. Although, I think by all accounts, we're off to the races. Unfortunately, though, as I look at our leaderboard of sorts here, the same cannot be said for the Bitcoin mining sector. In fact, only 3 companies that are on my little universe dashboard of sorts actually closed, with a gain today. The rest were all down. So that's kind of thought-provoking. So in the top spot today, Bitdeer up nearly 6%. That's actually down from being up almost, I think, over 10% at one point today. Bitdeer has really been on fire. Next on the list is Hut 8. Of course, Hut 8 is a company that I think gained a bit of fame or notoriety, depending on how you want to look at it, just based on that report that was released, calling into question a lot of different things about the company. Hey, look, the company certainly has performed incredibly well insofar as its stock price, I think arguably helped not so much by its operational hash rate in terms of Bitcoin mining, which I don't know is even above 6 right now. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's really like a low number, like what, 5, 6, maybe 7 at the most. But they do have a hodl, and that has helped. And the stock is over $27 a share. Over $27 a share, up a little over 2% today. And then finally, Cipher mining was up fractionally. And at one point, our very own stronghold Digital Mining was in that 3rd spot, but could not, unfortunately, hold on. And so, Bitdeer, Hut 8, and Cipher were in the top 3 spots today, all the way at the very bottom of the list. The so-called rock, as I'm kind of calling it, today finally was not Argo Blockchain, which, my gosh, that company's been pummeled, it seems, the past number of days. Today, it just happened to be BitDigital. Sometimes what goes up does come down and can come down quite profoundly, which is my concern as it relates to Bitcoin, especially, look, maybe you and me, hey, we've been around the block a couple of times. I really do worry just a little bit about somebody who, for the very first time, is deciding right now, hey, with Bitcoin at about $100,000 a coin, I want to really, hey, I'm going to go all in, or I'm going to really buy a bunch of this stuff via an ETF or buying Bitcoin directly. And then, inevitably, unless this is going to be the long spoken about super cycle where Bitcoin doesn't ever really go down anymore, but simply makes new quarterly highs quarter after quarter as more and more institutions and countries and people adopt Bitcoin as a reserve asset, if you want to call it that. Absent that happening, right, we're likely to eventually find ourselves in something of a crypto winter. And I don't know how cold or how lonely it will be once that crypto winter arrives, but I do know that it can be quite lonely and quite cold, and it can be quite scary. If your average purchase price of Bitcoin is, say, 100,000, and suddenly Bitcoin is at maybe 35,000, and suddenly it's not in the headlines anymore. Nobody's talking about creating some strategic Bitcoin reserve. It's just kind of like, what's going on? And that's kind of ironic to me, right? Bitcoin, arguably, yes, with the introduction of ETFs earlier this year in 2024, maybe you could say, yeah, that was a game changer. But fundamentally, Bitcoin is what it's kind of always been to some extent. So I'd love to one day find ourselves in the middle of a crypto winter and yet have there be tremendous excitement from the general public, from politicians, from institutions, all saying, hey, you know what? It's the same Bitcoin that we believe in, and now it's an even lower price. We're even more excited to get into it. But I think you and I both know it doesn't quite work out that way, right? It's usually the opposite. It's like everybody's running for the proverbial hills. Nobody wants to touch this anymore. It's a fool's gold. It's a sucker's bet, etc., etc., etc. And I guess these are just the way these markets operate. So please use some degree of caution. If you're brand new to this and you're excited and you're like, I want to get started in this, hey, check out maybe shares of Bitfarms, which today were down 6 cents, about $2.08 was a close, more or less. And I'll tell you, I think Bitfarms has not participated as of yet in a real meaningful way in the rally that we've seen, right, with Bitcoin, specifically Bitcoin and perhaps more broadly with some of the top Bitcoin mining companies that have done pretty darn well, generally speaking. But I'm cautiously optimistic that Bitfarms will eventually start to catch up, presumably because their operations have really started to build up, and we see, hey, we're hitting our goals, we're hitting our milestones, and we're really starting to just generate a lot of money. Right now, it seems like a lot of the money's flowing towards Bitcoin mining companies like Mara, for example, or companies that essentially have decided, hey, we want to just hodl as much Bitcoin as possible. That's not universally true. I've noticed CleanSpark has kind of been struggling. It's down to $13.93. I mean, it's kind of like hard to wrap my head around some of this. I mean, CleanSpark arguably is probably right up there, right, as one of the most efficient Bitcoin mining companies, and yet the stock can't seem to gain meaningful traction. Yes, it's up from like, what, $8 or so back in the autumn, but still, I mean, Bitcoin's at 100,000. You would think a lot of these Bitcoin mining companies, right, Bitfarms included, would be, substantially higher than where they are. So we'll have to see how this plays out in the days ahead. Okay, my friend. There's a 50-50 chance we may not necessarily get together tomorrow the way we're doing so right now. I still anticipate there being an update of some kind, but it might be a slightly different format. So keep that in mind. So until then, let's stay positive, let's be great, and we will see each other then.